"Sir, step back onto the sidewalk." The officer's voice was sharp, his hand already resting on his taser. Samuel Bell, 78 years old, blind from a service-related infection, froze, his black Labrador guide pressing close to his side. He never heard the click of the weapon being drawn. The pain was instant. Despite his white cane and guide's harness, the officers missed every sign. What happened next would remind his comrades in his city that a decorated veteran still commands respect. Within moments, a convoy of soldiers arrived, forming a barricade around the fallen man. For Samuel Bell, respect was earned long before that day. Samuel Bell's story began long before the chaos of that city intersection. At 18, his vision was sharp and his ambitions clear. He quickly distinguished himself in training, earning a commission and rising to lead small teams on remote jungle deployments where the boundaries between safety and danger blurred each night. By his late 20s, Captain Bell was trusted with covert assignments in some of the most hazardous environments U.S. forces faced, where every decision could mean the difference between survival and disaster. The pivotal moment came during a reconnaissance mission in 1987. Bell's unit was moving through dense jungle when they were ambushed. With gunfire erupting from the shadows, he reacted, instantly directing his team to defensive positions and organizing a coordinated withdrawal. Several soldiers went down in the first exchange, and Bell's priorities shifted from the mission to his men's survival. He ordered the medics to evacuate the wounded first, remaining at the rear with a handful of volunteers to provide cover. Amid the confusion, he exposed himself repeatedly to retrieve critical equipment, each trip risking his life but ensuring that sensitive intelligence wouldn't fall into enemy hands. It was in the aftermath of that firefight, in makeshift field hospitals set up under tarps and surrounded by mud, that Bell's fate changed. The wounded kept coming, and the supplies ran low. With only basic instruments, Bell performed emergency procedures on the spot, improvising with whatever was available. The jungle humidity and lack of sanitation made every cut and scrape a potential threat. Weeks later, he noticed his vision blurring a haze that crept in slowly but refused to leave. Army doctors soon discovered a rare, aggressive infection in his eyes, one likely contracted during those sleepless nights treating others. They urged evacuation, but Bell refused, knowing he was the only experienced trauma surgeon left in the field hospital. He continued working through the pain, his shifts stretching past exhaustion, unwilling to leave his post until the crisis passed. By the time Bell finally agreed to be airlifted out, the infection had done its worst. Specialists at Walter Reed confirmed that the damage was irreversible. His optic nerves were permanently scarred. Later reviews of his medical file suggested that earlier intervention might have saved at least some of his sight, but Bell had made his choice. For him, the risk to his own health was secondary to the lives he could still help save. His Silver Star citation would later acknowledge his repeated acts of valor and the selfless devotion that defined his command. Official records credit him with saving at least 14 lives during that ambush, though the true number remains classified. Yet Bell rarely spoke of medals or heroics. Those who served with him recalled a leader who downplayed his sacrifices, insisting that what he did was only his duty. Adjusting to life without sight was its own battle. Bell spent months in rehabilitation after returning home, learning to navigate a world that had gone dark. He never displayed his medals, storing them away instead, and quietly accepted reassignment to administrative duties, rather than seeking medical retirement. Former squad members described him as stoic and reserved, preferring to focus on helping others rather than dwell on his own losses. Bell's approach to blindness reflected the same discipline that had guided him through combat. He practiced new routes until he could walk them unaided, relying first on a mobility cane and later on the guidance of his first service dog, a German shepherd named Valor. Neighbors would see him memorizing every detail of his apartment, determined to remain self-sufficient. He never asked for help, even when the weather turned harsh or the city grew noisy and crowded. Doctors reviewing his case years later confirmed that Bell's refusal to leave his wounded soldiers had directly contributed to his vision loss. But for those who knew him, this came as no surprise. Putting others first had always been his instinct, and it remained his guiding principle as he rebuilt his life. As Bell prepared to take on the challenges of civilian life, the skills and habits forged in those difficult years would shape every step that followed. After returning home, Bell faced the reality of life without sight, with the same discipline he had shown on the battlefield. His rehabilitation at the VA facility was thorough and demanding, stretching across months of daily sessions. Therapists introduced him to Braille, tactile labeling, and the subtle art of navigating by sound. Early on, Bell struggled with spatial awareness, often misjudging distances or bumping into obstacles. But his determination was evident. He practiced cane techniques, long after others had left, refusing to leave a task unfinished. The staff noted his progress in weekly reports, marking each small victory as Bell learned to read elevator buttons by touch or orient himself using the echo of his footsteps in unfamiliar hallways. A turning point came when he was paired with his first service dog. The black Labrador Guide became his constant companion, helping Bell reclaim his independence and confidence. Guide's steady presence made it possible for Bell to venture beyond the VA grounds, explore his neighborhood, and build new routines. The partnership between man and dog was seamless. Neighbors often remarked on how the two moved as if connected by an invisible thread. Guide's training covered everything from navigating crowded sidewalks to stopping at curbs and alerting Bell to oncoming vehicles. Over time, Bell's reliance on Guide deepened not just for mobility, but for the subtle reassurance that he was never truly alone. Bell's insistence on self-sufficiency became part of his identity. He developed systems to mark canned goods in his pantry with rubber bands, memorized the layout of his apartment, and learned to distinguish coins by their edges. He refused help with grocery shopping, preferring to move quietly through the aisles with Guide at his side, even when it meant taking twice as long to complete his errands. Maintenance staff in his building recalled how Bell would wait for hallways to clear before making his way to the laundry room, avoiding unnecessary attention or offers of assistance. His routines were deliberate, shaped by a desire to maintain control over his life and avoid being seen as a burden. Despite his preference for independence, Bell found purpose in service to others. Twice each week, he traveled by bus to the VA hospital, where he counseled newly blinded veterans. Bell's approach was practical, demonstrated how to use smartphone screen readers, fold bills for easy identification, and cook simple meals using tactile markers. Former patients described how Bell's calm, methodical teaching style made daunting tasks seem achievable. He rarely spoke about his own service or the circumstances of his blindness, focusing instead on helping others regain their footing. Bell also became a fixture at the local public library, volunteering in the children's section 3 afternoons a week. He memorized dozens of books, reciting stories from memory and using different voices to bring each character to life. Children looked forward to his storytime sessions, often requesting favorites he'd performed before. Library staff noted that Bell never needed to be reminded of his schedule, and he navigated the building with practiced ease. His presence was so familiar that regular patrons would sometimes forget he was blind until they saw Guide quietly waiting at his feet. His apartment reflected his minimalist approach to life. Beyond the essentials and a few military awards, there was little decoration. The silver star hung above his commission certificate, flanked by unit citations, each frame polished weekly. Bell's days followed a steady rhythm: early mornings with Guide, breakfast, a walk to the cafe for coffee, and then the library or VA. The Elm Street intersection, with its unpredictable traffic and inconsistent audible signals, was a fixture in his daily route. Bell had crossed it hundreds of times, always waiting for the chirping signal and counting the cycles before stepping off the curb. He'd even submitted service requests to the city about the signal's volume, hoping to make the crossing safer for others. Bell's relationship with Guide spanned years, and when the aging Labrador retired, a new partner took over. Atlas, a yellow Labrador, arrived after advanced training in crowd navigation and emergency response. The transition was seamless. Atlas quickly learned Bell's routines and routes, including the walk to the corner cafe, where staff placed Bell's coffee at the same table each morning. The bond between Bell and Atlas was obvious to anyone who saw them together, the dog's alert gaze matched by Bell's quiet confidence. By the time of the incident, Bell's life was defined by these routines and the quiet determination that had carried him through every challenge. Each day began much the same, a greeting with neighbors, coffee at the cafe, and then the walk with Atlas past the familiar landmarks of his neighborhood. The Elm Street intersection remained a test of patience and precision, but Bell met it as he did everything else with methodical preparation and unwavering focus. On the morning in question, nothing seemed out of place as Bell and Atlas set out for the library. The city moved around them as usual, the sidewalks busy but familiar, the air cool and bright. Bell's steps were measured, Atlas's harness steady in his hand, as they approached the intersection that had become part of their daily journey. That morning, the intersection was alive, with city sounds engines idling, distant horns, the faint chirp of the pedestrian signal. Bell paused at the curb, listening intently. The audible signal, meant to guide those who couldn't see, was barely louder than the ambient traffic, its volume reduced by a faulty amplifier. Bell hesitated, counting the faint chirps, uncertain if the crossing was truly safe. Atlas sat poised at his side, vest visible, waiting for the forward command. Bell's white cane tapped the concrete, marking his presence as much as it mapped his path. He waited through several cycles of the signal, lips moving as he counted under his breath. The routine was familiar, but something felt off lingered longer than usual, straining to hear the next cue. Atlas remained still, eyes fixed ahead, ready to move only when Bell was certain. Finally, Bell gave the command, and together they stepped into the crosswalk, the cane sweeping steadily, Atlas guiding him forward. The service dog's vest, with its bold lettering, was unmistakable in the morning light. A patrol car idled nearby, its occupants Officer Miller and Officer Davis watching from inside. The officers appeared distracted, their attention split between the street and their own conversation. Neither checked recent dispatch notes about the intersection's signal issues. As Bell and Atlas made their way across, Miller abruptly activated the cruiser's PA system, his voice amplified and abrupt. "Sir, move along. You're blocking traffic." The sudden announcement startled Atlas, who stiffened at Bell's side. Bell faltered, cane missing its arc for a moment, his rhythm disrupted by the unfamiliar noise. Without warning, Miller exited the vehicle, leaving his door open as he approached the crosswalk. His hand hovered near his duty belt, fingers brushing the taser holster. The bright orange service dog patch on Atlas's vest and Bell's extended white cane were both clearly visible, yet neither officer seemed to register their significance. Miller called out again, louder. "Step back onto the sidewalk." The command was sharp, urgency replacing any attempt at explanation. Bell froze, unsure where the voice was coming from. His cane extended rigidly in front of him. Bell tried to orient himself, turning his head toward the sound. Atlas shifted his stance, positioning himself between Bell and the approaching officer, a protective but non-aggressive move. The dog made no sound, simply standing his ground. The traffic around the intersection slowed, a few drivers pausing to watch as the scene unfolded. Miller advanced to within several feet, his voice raised. "Last warning." At the same time, he drew his taser, the device's laser activating, a red dot appearing on Bell's chest. Bell's cane tapped forward and made contact with Miller's shua, standard technique for identifying obstacles, not a threat. Miller stepped back reflexively, the tension in the air growing. Davis remained in the patrol car, eyes flicking between the scene and the dashboard, making no move to intervene. Atlas, sensing Bell's distress, pressed closer, his body angled protectively. Despite the visible service dog vest, Miller's focus remained fixed on Bell's movements. He shouted, "Control your animal," even as Atlas remained beside Bell, unmoving except for the subtle shift to shield his handler. Bell reached down, likely to reassure Atlas, his cane lifting slightly as his hand moved. In that instant, Miller interpreted the action as a threat. He fired the taser, the probe striking Bell's upper chest. Bell's body stiffened, his knees buckling as he fell backward onto the pavement. Atlas immediately lay down beside him, pressing close in a trained response to medical emergencies. The intersection stilled, bystanders beginning to gather at the curb, some raising phones to record, others calling out in alarm. The audible pedestrian signal continued to chirp faintly, cycling through its pattern, unnoticed by the officers. Bell's cane skidded across the asphalt, coming to rest near a parked delivery van. Miller radioed for assistance, his report omitting any mention of Bell's blindness or the presence of a service dog. Within moments, a delivery driver and several witnesses approached, their voices urgent. One pointed at Atlas's vest, trying to get the officer's attention. The commotion grew as more bystanders realized what had happened, but the officers remained focused on procedure, not the context of Bell's disability. Paramedics arrived quickly. Finding Bell still on the pavement, Atlas pressed close. The intersection's usual rhythm was broken, replaced by confusion and concern. The events of the crossing, shaped by a barely audible signal, a missed cue, and a failure to recognize the signs of disability, set the stage for what would follow next. Officer Miller's voice cut through the ambient noise, sharp and impatient. "Sir, you're creating a public disturbance. I told you to stay on the sidewalk." Sam Bell, cane in hand, turned toward the sound, his brow furrowed in confusion. He swept his cane in front of him, tapping for orientation, but the officer's words offered no clarity. Only accusation. Miller's next comment, "Are you deaf and blind?" came out as a challenge, rather than a question. Sam hesitated, his grip tightening on Guide's harness. The old Labrador pressed against his leg, alert and tense but not aggressive, his vest's bold lettering visible even from across the intersection. The moment stretched, tension building. Miller's hand hovered over his taser. Davis remained in the patrol car, watching but not moving. Sam's cane tapped once more, this time striking Miller's shoe, a harmless, instinctive gesture for a man who navigated the world by touch. Miller flinched, misreading the contact as defiance. He took a half-step back, voice rising. "Control your animal." Sam reached down, searching for Guide's harness, his cane momentarily lifting out of its arc. In a split second, Miller fired. The taser's barbed probes shot forward, wires trailing, embedding in Sam's chestbone near his collarbone, the other perilously close to his pacemaker. The jolt hit with full force, 50, 0 volts surging through Sam's body. He cried out, his muscles seizing, legs folding beneath him. His cane clattered to the pavement and skidded away. He fell hard, the back of his head striking the asphalt, blood pooling quickly beneath his left ear. Guide, startled by the noise and the sudden collapse, sprang into action. The dog barked once, then pressed his body against Sam, nudging his face and licking at his cheek. Guide's training took over. The stayed close, his presence both a shield and a comfort. Sam's hand twitched, reaching blindly for the familiar fur, but his body convulsed, the effects of the taser compounded by the pacemaker's malfunction. His breathing grew ragged, chest heaving as his heart rhythm faltered. Miller advanced, taser still drawn, uncertain whether to approach. The wires remained taut, the device's pulse continuing in short intervals. Davis radioed for backup, his call terse and incomplete. "Mail down. Possible disturbance." He did not mention the white cane or the service dog vest, details that might have changed the response. A woman in blue scrubs a nurse on her way to a shift rushed from the sidewalk. She knelt beside Sam, shouting, "He's seizing! He's blind!" Her hands moved quickly, rolling Sam onto his side, checking for a medical alert bracelet. When she found it, she held it up to Miller, the red caduceus symbol clear. "He has a pacemaker," she yelled. Miller hesitated, then finally released the trigger, disconnecting the current, but the damage was done. Guide remained pressed against Sam's legs, ears flat, eyes fixed on the nurse and the officers. The dog did not bark again, but his body trembled with tension. He nudged Sam's hand, refusing to leave. When paramedics arrived, they had to coax Guide away, promising he could ride in the ambulance. Guide relented only when Sam's scent faded from the crosswalk. The paramedics worked quickly, assessing Sam's erratic pulse and the head wound. They loaded him onto a stretcher, Guide leaping in after him. One probe had lodged dangerously close to the pacemaker, and Sam's heart continued to misfire. The ambulance sped away, sirens echoing off the buildings, as the officers remained at the scene, uncertain and silent. Witnesses had begun to gather at the edges of the intersection. Some filmed with their phones. Others called out questions that went unanswered. The crosswalk was marked now by drops of blood, a white cane lying forgotten near the curb, and the lingering echo of Guide's anxious bark. As the ambulance disappeared into traffic, the tension at the intersection shifted. The bystanders who had watched the scene unfold were no longer passive. Their attention turned from the officers to each other, searching for answers, for someone to take charge. The silence was broken not by police radios, but by the voices of those who refused to look away. On the sidewalk across from the intersection, retired Army Colonel David Greer set down his coffee the moment he saw the commotion. Years of service had taught him to recognize a crisis before most people even registered the danger. He moved with purpose, pulling his VA identification from his wallet as he crossed the street. Greer didn't hesitate. He pushed through the crowd, noting the silver star emblem on Bell's license plate and immediately understanding the gravity of the situation. He announced to the paramedics, "He's a Silver Star recipient," making sure they knew exactly who was lying on the pavement. Within minutes, other veterans and medical professionals in the area noticed what was happening. They converged on the scene, some still in scrubs, others with the bearing of men and women who had worn the uniform. Without coordination, they formed a protective ring around Bell and his service dog, giving paramedics space to work and keeping the officers at bay. Their presence was quiet, but unmistakable, a show of solidarity that needed no words. The crowd grew, and so did the tension. Some bystanders shouted at the officers, their voices sharp with disbelief. One woman's cry cut through the noise. "He's blind, you idiots. He's got a service dog. What are you doing?" Others pulled out their phones, recording every detail. Lena Marcos, a local resident, began live streaming from the curb. Her footage captured the officers' confusion and the gathering of veterans, as well as the arrival of the ambulance. The video spread rapidly online, picked up by viewers who recognized the injustice unfolding in real time. Footage from Marcos and others would soon reach tens of thousands, and the hashtag #BlindVeteranTased started trending across social media platforms. The growing outcry online turned a local incident into a national concern, putting immediate pressure on city officials and the police department. Greer, meanwhile, knew the usual channels would be too slow. He stepped away from the crowd and made a direct call to a military contact at the Regional Joint Command. There was no need for lengthy explanation. She gave Bell's name and location, stressing the urgency. The call bypassed local bureaucracy, reaching the right people in minutes. Greer's actions reflected the deep sense of duty and camaraderie that runs through the veteran community. When one of their own is in trouble, the response is immediate and unwavering. As paramedics worked, the veterans kept their protective formation. They watched every move, making sure Bell received the care he needed, and that his service dog Guide was not separated from him. The medics moved efficiently, stabilizing Bell and preparing him for transport. The presence of so many trained eyes added a layer of scrutiny. Every medical decision was witnessed, every action noted. The live stream continued as police attempted to regain control of the scene. Officer Miller tried to question Bell during treatment, but a Marine veteran stepped between them, shaking his head. "Not now," he said quietly, blocking the officer's path. That moment, captured in Marcos's video, quickly became the most replayed clip. The sight of veterans standing firm against authority resonated with viewers, fueling further outrage and calls for accountability. At the same time, VA hospital staff monitoring emergency channels recognized Bell's name and the seriousness of his injuries. They activated a high-priority protocol, alerting senior leadership. Greer relayed updates by phone, his voice steady and precise as he described Bell's condition and the scene at the intersection. The coordination between bystanders, veterans, and medical staff was seamless. Each person understood their role, each action taken with purpose. As the ambulance prepared to leave, the veterans maintained their circle, ensuring Bell and Guide were transported together. The crowd watched as the paramedics loaded Bell into the vehicle, Guide leaping in after him without hesitation. The protective presence of the veterans and the attention from the live stream meant that every detail was recorded and witnessed. The police, once in control, now stood back, their authority overshadowed by the quiet competence of those who had stepped in. The video of the incident continued to spread, drawing national media attention and prompting statements from advocacy groups and public officials. The immediate, organized response from the veteran community, combined with the viral documentation, ensured that what happened at that intersection would not be ignored or misrepresented. As the ambulance pulled away and the crowd began to disperse, a different kind of movement was already underway. Downtown traffic patterns shifted, and the first hints of an unusual response began to register on city surveillance feeds. The events set in motion by those first bystander actions would soon bring an even greater presence to the intersection. The intersection's usual noise faded beneath a new, unmistakable sound, a low, steady rumble that signaled something out of the ordinary. The first olive-drab Humvee came into view, diesel engine pulsing, amber lights flashing in deliberate rhythm. Two more followed, flanked by a light-medium tactical vehicle, their presence immediately shifting the atmosphere. The convoy moved with purpose, not urgency-no sirens, just the warning lights and the deep resonance of military engines. Civilian cars slowed and stopped as the vehicles rolled through red lights, forming an unbroken line that cut off all approaches to Elm and 3rd. Within moments, the Humvees formed a barricade at the intersection, blocking traffic from every direction. Soldiers in fatigues disembarked in practice sequence, each one taking up a position along the perimeter. They didn't shout or gesture wildly. Their actions were measured, their intent clear. The perimeter closed quickly, a silent assertion of authority that left no room for confusion. Military police began redirecting pedestrians, their tone calm and direct, while a handful moved to secure the immediate area around the ambulance where Samuel Bell lay. The change in control was immediate. The police, who had dominated the scene only minutes before, found themselves edged out, their presence suddenly secondary. The soldiers focused on the essentials: establishing order, ensuring safety, and protecting the wounded veteran on the ground. Their movements showed discipline, but also a respect for the seriousness of the moment. The crowd, which had grown tense and vocal, quieted as the military presence settled over the intersection. A black SUV arrived next, its government plates and subdued markings setting it apart from the rest of the convoy. The door opened, and General Michael Vance stepped out, this uniform crisp, rows of ribbons and 4 silver stars catching the morning light. He moved with quiet authority, his face unreadable as he surveyed the scene. General Vance's arrival was not dramatic, but it was decisive. The MPs parted to allow him through, and he walked directly to the ambulance, pausing only to acknowledge the paramedics and the veterans still standing guard. General Vance leaned in to speak with the lead medic, his voice low but firm. He asked for a status update on Bell, then addressed the officers who had been involved. "Did you identify yourselves? Did you offer assistance to the man in the crosswalk?" His questions were pointed but not theatrical, each one underscoring the expectation of accountability. The officers, Miller and Davis, stood silent, their earlier certainty replaced by visible discomfort. As General Vance spoke, the MPs began collecting evidence. 2 specialists moved methodically through the scene, gathering police body cams and dash cam footage, sealing each device in tamper-evident bags. Another team documented the position of Bell's cane, the taser wires, and the location of each witness. Photographs were taken from multiple angles, and a staff sergeant used a laser tool to record precise distances between key points. Their work was efficient, a stark contrast to the confusion that had preceded their arrival. The perimeter held steady as additional military vehicles arrived, bringing communications equipment and folding tables for witness interviews. MPs distributed water bottles to those waiting behind the barricade, maintaining a sense of calm even as the city's usual routines were suspended. The veterans who had formed the initial circle around Bell remained close, now joined by military personnel, who treated them as partners rather than bystanders. Inside the ambulance, Bell's condition stabilized as the paramedics prepared him for transport. Atlas, his service dog, stayed at his side, watched closely by both medics and soldiers. The MPs coordinated with the VA hospital, arranging for a trauma team to receive Bell and ensuring that Atlas would not be separated from him during transfer. When the ambulance departed, it did so under military escort, a Humvee clearing the route and 2 MPs riding with Bell to the hospital. General Vance stayed at the scene, working with his staff to coordinate the next steps. His aide carried a secure tablet, relaying updates from the Pentagon and other agencies. Vance reviewed each message, signing off on the military's assumption of jurisdiction over the incident. He spoke briefly with city officials at the edge of the cordon, making clear that the military would manage the investigation from this point forward. As the morning wore on, the military presence remained steady, but never heavy-handed. Engineers arrived to repair the faulty pedestrian signal, while MPs continued to interview witnesses and document the scene. The police officers involved were escorted to military vehicles not under arrest, but held for questioning. Their weapons were secured, and they were transported to a nearby installation for further review. By the time the last Humvee rolled away, the intersection was transformed. Civilian traffic resumed under the direction of MPs, but the crosswalk where Bell had fallen remained cordoned off, marked by the careful work of investigators and the memory of what had happened. The efficiency and clarity of the military response stood in sharp contrast to the confusion that had come before. The convoy's departure did not restore normalcy, but it established a new order defined by accountability, respect, and a clear sense of responsibility. The city's attention was now fixed on what would come next, as the military prepared to formalize its authority over the case. Military protocol was set in motion the moment General Vance stepped onto the scene. Under Article 4.12, a rarely used regulation designed to protect wounded or decorated veterans on American soil, military police took immediate jurisdiction. The regulation was unfamiliar to most, but it gave the armed forces authority to intervene when a decorated veteran faced harm in a civilian setting. No debate, no drawn-out negotiations. MPs moved with quiet efficiency, sealing off the intersection, collecting evidence, and taking over the investigation from local authorities. The first steps were unmistakable. Military police collected every piece of police body cam and dash cam footage, logging the equipment and placing it in tamper-evident bags. Officers Miller and Davis were not placed under arrest, but they were escorted away from the scene for questioning. MPs handled the process with formality, no accusations, just a clear shift in control. Investigators began interviewing witnesses, separating accounts to prevent crosstalk, and documenting the scene in detail. Bell's white cane was photographed, bagged, and tagged as federal evidence. The faulty pedestrian signal was tested and recorded, its volume measured, and its malfunction noted in the official report. At the VA hospital, the response tracked the same urgency. A trauma team specializing in cardiac emergencies was waiting for Bell's arrival, already briefed on his medical history. They assumed care from city paramedics without hesitation, moving Bell directly into a monitored room. Atlas, the service dog, was checked by a military veterinarian, his paws inspected for burns, his vitals reviewed, and his stress levels monitored. Both patient and dog were cleared for ongoing observation, with MPs posted outside their room for added security. The city's leadership found themselves shut out of the process. The mayor, expecting to coordinate the response, was met by a line of MPs at the cordon. He was redirected to the Pentagon's Public Affairs Office, where updates were limited to brief, carefully worded statements. The chief of police received the same treatment. Requests for access or information were routed through military channels. It was a clear, if quiet, assertion of federal authority, one that left local officials sidelined. The Pentagon's communications team worked quickly to manage the public narrative. The first press release appeared within an hour, confirming only that a decorated veteran was receiving care after an incident involving local police. Updates followed, each one tailored to counter rumors and misinformation spreading online. As social media amplified the bystander footage, hashtags surged, and veterans groups began sharing stories of similar protections in the past. Article 4.12, once obscure, was suddenly the subject of viral threads and media commentary. Congressional representatives issued public statements, calling for reviews of police training and the handling of disabled veterans. Inside the VA hospital, security was heightened. MPs supplemented the hospital's own staff, screening every visitor to Bell's floor and limiting access to those with clearance. Medical records were locked down, available only to the trauma team and authorized military personnel. Reporters gathered in the lobby, pressing for updates, but official statements remained limited. Mr. Bell is resting comfortably. No further information at this time. The hospital became a fortress, focused on Bell's recovery and privacy. The investigation itself followed strict military forensic protocols. MPs canvassed the intersection, collecting physical evidence and interviewing witnesses. Traffic engineers measured the crosswalk, and audio specialists documented the pedestrian signal's failure. Surveillance footage from nearby businesses was gathered, and every detail was cataloged. The focus was not just on what had happened, but on how and why the systems in place had failed to protect a decorated veteran. Back at the military installation, legal teams began reviewing the incident from multiple angles. One team focused on possible violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Another looked at civil rights implications. The scope of the review extended beyond the immediate actions of the officers, probing the adequacy of local training and the effectiveness of city infrastructure for those with disabilities. The question of whether military jurisdiction would extend past the initial 72-hour window remained open, but the process had begun. As the day wore on, the military's visible presence at the intersection gradually receded. MPs left the scene, but investigators remained, continuing to collect information and monitor developments. Repairs to the pedestrian signals progressed quickly, with city crews working under military oversight to ensure compliance with accessibility standards. At the hospital, Bell's condition stabilized, and Atlas remained at his side, the two of them watched over by a rotating team of nurses and MPs. The regulation that had triggered the military response now drew scrutiny from legal experts and the public alike. Some questioned whether such intervention was warranted, while others saw it as overdue recognition of the debt owed to those who had served. For Bell, the legal debates and public statements faded into the background. What mattered was the steady routine of hospital care, the quiet presence of his service dog, and the knowledge that, for once, the systems meant to protect him had done their job. In the days that followed, attention shifted from the immediate aftermath to the man at the center of it all. As military protocol played out, the story of Samuel Bell began to draw new interest, prompting questions about his past and the reasons for the extraordinary response. As the military secured the intersection and the public tried to make sense of the rapid response, attention turned to Samuel Bell himself. The incident brought a wave of renewed interest in his past, prompting news outlets and historians to dig deeper into his record. Declassified documents began to surface, revealing details that had long been hidden from public view. One newly released report described a mission in Central America that stood out even among Bell's peers. During a peacekeeping deployment in the early 1980s, Bell's unit was tasked with intelligence gathering near a village threatened by advancing insurgents. When it became clear that civilians faced imminent danger, Bell refused to withdraw as ordered. Instead, he commandeered transport trucks and organized a series of convoys to evacuate every resident. For 2 days, he led each trip through contested territory, returning again and again until the last villager was safe. The after-action summary noted he went more than 70 hours without sleep, running on black coffee and determination. This act was cited not only for its tactical skill but for the risks he took to protect strangers, reinforcing the sense of duty that would define his reputation. The release of Bell's medical records added another dimension to his story. The infection that cost him his sight was not the result of a single moment in combat, but of his actions in the aftermath. During a deployment, Bell worked alongside his troops to treat wounded civilians, many of them children, at a makeshift aid station. Supplies were scarce, and sterile gloves ran out quickly. Still, Bell continued to dress wounds and perform minor surgeries, often barehanded. A nurse's log from that week captured his mindset. Captain Bell changed dressings on 12 patients who need our last pair of gloves tore on the 3rd. He said, "Germs don't care about paperwork," and kept working. The infection that followed was aggressive and irreversible, but Bell never blamed anyone or complained. His concern remained with those he had helped. Former squad members began to share their own accounts, bringing Bell's character into sharper focus. One recalled how Bell carried 2 wounded soldiers out of a minefield, guiding them by memory and instinct in darkness. Another described Bell's refusal to take credit for successful missions, always attributing outcomes to his team. These stories, once confined to quiet conversations among veterans, took on new weight as they circulated online and in the press. They painted a picture of a leader who saw no distinction between his own safety and the safety of others. For Bell, the mission always included everyone: comrades, civilians, and even strangers caught in the crossfire. Military historians noted that Bell belonged to a rare groupon of only 7 living veterans awarded both the Silver Star and the Valor Unit Citation. The latter required unanimous approval from a panel of generals, underscoring the exceptional nature of his service. His file included a commendation for humanitarian service, awarded for the village evacuation, and cited repeated disregard for personal safety across multiple deployments. The distinction explained why the military had contingency plans in place for Bell, and why his mistreatment triggered such an immediate response. The Pentagon confirmed that Bell's name appeared on a protected veterans list, a program designed to ensure rapid intervention for high-risk individuals. This protocol was rarely activated, reserved for those whose records reflected extraordinary sacrifice and vulnerability. The military's swift arrival at Elm Street was not improvised. It was the result of years of planning and rehearsals, all rooted in the belief that service does not end when a uniform comes off. Bell's life outside the military reflected the same ethos. He declined live-in care despite qualifying for it, insisting on his independence. He volunteered at the public library, memorizing books to read to children and adapting his routines to maintain self-sufficiency. Neighbors and librarians described him as quiet, disciplined, and unfailingly patient, never drawing attention to his own challenges. Cell phone videos showed him navigating the Elm Street intersection with practiced precision, providing silent testimony against claims of confusion or incompetence. As Bell's story spread, veterans groups and military forums filled with messages of support and recognition. Stories surfaced of Bell guiding newly blinded service members through rehabilitation, teaching Braille, and volunteering at correctional facilities for veterans. Each account echoed the same theme. Bell's commitment to others never wavered, whether in uniform or as a civilian. A letter from Bell's former commanding officer, written years earlier, surfaced as the media coverage intensified. In it, Bell wrote, "If I had to choose between seeing another sunrise or knowing my men made it home, I'd make the same choice every time." That sentiment captured the essence of why the military responded as it did, not just to protect a veteran, but to honor someone who embodied the values of service and sacrifice. In the days following the incident, the consequences of that legacy began to unfold, shaping how the city, the military, and the public would respond next. After the events at Elm Street, the city moved quickly to address what had happened. Officers Miller and Davis were suspended without pay as soon as the investigations began, a response that signaled just how seriously the department and the public viewed the incident. Internal affairs, and a parallel federal inquiry prompted by military involvement, began reviewing every detail, from body cam footage to prior complaints. The sealed evidence in the officers' records, including missed disability training and earlier use of force incidents, became central to the official review. The police department wasted little time in overhauling its training. Within days, every patrol officer was required to attend new sessions focused on de-escalation and interactions with people with disabilities, especially veterans. Instructors used the footage from the Elm Street crossing as a case study, pausing to highlight every miscued reflective cane, the service dog's harness, the faint pedestrian signal. Training now included modules on recognizing mobility aids, understanding veteran-specific behaviors, and consulting with VA liaisons for any calls involving disabilities. The department's leadership understood that reform could not be superficial. The changes had to be thorough and lasting. City officials also committed to making the streets safer. The outdated pedestrian signals, long a source of complaints, were repaired and upgraded throughout the downtown area. The Elm Street crossing, where the incident had occurred, received a new audible signal with backup speakers and volume controls. Maintenance crews began twice-daily checks instead of weekly ones, and the city council quietly approved funding for accessibility improvements that had been stalled for years. Residents noticed the difference. The new signals were louder, clearer, and more reliably an overdue improvement, but one that now carried a sense of urgency. At the federal level, the impact was just as immediate. The Department of Veterans Affairs launched Operation Atlas, a new program designed to identify and support high-risk veterans across the country. Using criteria based on Bell's case multiple decorations, severe disabilities, and a history of public incidents, the VA created a secure alert system for local law enforcement. Officers on patrol now received encrypted notifications about veterans in their jurisdictions, including service details and preferred contact methods. The goal was to prevent misunderstandings before they escalated, and to ensure that veterans received the respect and assistance they deserved. Bell's own life changed, in subtle but significant ways. Military police, dressed in civilian clothes but carrying identification, accompanied him on outings for several weeks, monitoring his recovery and stepping in only if needed. The presence of these escorts drew some attention at first, but soon became routine. Regulars at the library and the cafe adjusted quickly, and drivers at the Elm Street crossing gave Bell and Atlas extra space. The city's small gestures Atlas's favorite treats behind the counter. A new plaque at the intersection reflected a quiet acknowledgement of what had happened, and the determination to do better. Even Atlas, Bell's service dog, was recognized for his role. The VA awarded him an honorary K9 medal, a small but meaningful gesture for his steady presence during the ordeal. Trainers noted that Atlas returned to his routines quickly, showing no residual stress. His only adjustment was to stay a little closer to Bell's left side during crossing a subtle shift, but one that spoke to the strength of their bond. The aftermath extended beyond the city. News of the incident led to increased calls to the VA crisis line, as veterans across the country saw proof that the system could respond when it mattered. Police departments in other states requested access to the new training modules, and lawmakers began drafting legislation requiring disability awareness and veteran-specific training for all first responders. The Elm Street crossing itself was renamed in Bell's honor, complete with a plaque in both print and braille, ensuring that the lessons from that day would not be forgotten. Bell declined to participate in the disciplinary process for the officers involved, submitting only a letter recommending improvements to police training. His focus remained on the future, on making the city safer for the next person who needed to cross the street. When asked for comment, he kept it simple. It was never about him, he said, but about making sure no one else faced the same risks. In the weeks that followed, the city settled into a new routine. The repaired signals worked as intended. The police academy's curriculum changed. Veterans in the community felt a little more visible, a little more protected. Bell returned to his volunteer work, his presence at the library and the VA, a quiet reminder of resilience and service. And each morning, at the crossing that now bore his name, the world paused just a little longer before moving on. What happened at Bell's crossing was more than a response to a single crisis. It was an expression of the Brotherhood's code, a principle that shapes how the military cares for its own, even decades after service ends. The code is not written in any manual, but it's understood by every service member. When one of theirs is in need, the response is immediate and absolute. In the days after the incident, congressional hearings revealed that Fort Harrison had prepared for moments like this. Commanders testified that monthly drills anticipated a range of emergencies involving high-risk veterans in the community. These exercises weren't just about logistics, they were about maintaining a promise. The military had studied the walking routes of veterans like Sam Bell, mapped out intersections, and reviewed city layouts. The plan was always ready, not out of paranoia, but out of respect for the sacrifices made by those who had served. The precision of the convoy's arrival wasn't improvisation. Within minutes of the call, military police had Bell's coordinates, understood the layout of the intersection, and executed a response that left no doubt about their intent. The Humvees blocking each approach, the MPs forming a perimeter, the evidence teams moving methodically each detail, reflected the seriousness with which the military approaches the duty to protect its own. This was not about challenging local authority, but about making clear that the bonds formed in service do not dissolve with time. The aftermath saw more than just a show of force. Veteran organizations across the country took inspiration from what happened and launched Bell Checks volunteer-led welfare programs that paired veterans with those at risk of isolation or harm. These check-ins weren't about surveillance or charity, but about community, a way to ensure that no one slipped through the cracks. In less than a year, the program spread to dozens of states, with thousands of veterans reaching out to one another. The idea was simple: you look out for those who've walked the same path. The incident also exposed gaps between military and civilian perspectives. Police records showed that most officers received only minimal training on disability awareness, while military recruits spent weeks internalizing stories of sacrifice and responsibility. The failure to recognize Bell's service dog vest and white cane was not just a lapse in judgment, but a sign of how easily the cues of military service and disability can be overlooked outside the community. This realization led to changes in police academies and city policy, but it also sparked conversations about the values that underpin public service. Bell's composure during the confrontation was not an accident. Those who knew him recognized the same calm he'd shown in combat-measured breathing, steady posture, absolute focus. Security footage from that morning matched the reports from his former commanding officer, who described Bell as someone whose instincts had been shaped by years of high-stakes decisions. Even Atlas, Bell's service dog, adapted in the aftermath. The Labrador resumed his duties within days, showing only minor changes in behavior. Trainers noted how Atlas would now position himself slightly farther forward when police radios crackled nearby, a small adjustment that reflected the same vigilance found in military teams. The renaming of the intersection, complete with a plaque in both Braille and raised text, became more than a memorial. Engineers installed a push button that played a recorded account of Bell's service and the events of that day. The Silver Star insignia, placed at fingertip height, became a quiet marker for those who understood its meaning. Veterans visiting the site often paused, tapping the plaque in silent acknowledgement before moving on. The intersection itself began to change. Rivers slowed, compliance with pedestrian right-of-way increased, and the audible signal became a trusted feature for everyone in the neighborhood. Behind the visible changes were smaller, quieter acts that spoke to the depth of the Brotherhood's code. Commanders at Fort Harrison invited local police to observe veteran assistance drills, sharing the thinking behind their protocols. Officers who attended these sessions reported a new understanding of why the military responds, as it does why the promise to protect is not just a matter of policy, but of identity. The base even updated its crisis protocols, ensuring that the lessons from Bell's case would inform future responses, not only for him but for any veteran in need. Atlas's resilience became a story in itself. His post-incident veterinary exams showed no signs of stress, and he quickly returned to his routines. The bond between Bell and Atlas grew even stronger, with Atlas now pressing his shoulder against Bell's leg before every Crosinga gesture trainers called tactile confirmation. a small but meaningful sign of trust and readiness. The Brotherhood's code is not about grand gestures or public recognition. It's about the quiet certainty that those who have served will never be left behind. In the months after the incident, veteran networks adopted new signals and check-ins, updating old habits for a new era. "Check your six" became shorthand for watching out for vulnerable comrades, a simple phrase that carried the weight of shared experience. Sam Bell's story did more than prompt reforms and new programs. It reshaped how we think about honoring and protecting those who have sacrificed for us. The legacy of the Brotherhood's code is not only in the visible changes at Bell's Crossing, but in the renewed commitment to never let service be forgotten, no matter how much time has passed. This lasting loyalty, quiet, steadfast, and unbreakable, remains at the heart of what it means to serve, and to be served in return. Samuel Bell's story is a reminder that vigilance and respect for veterans must extend beyond ceremonies and parades. The events at Elm Street showed the impact of both collective responsibility and individual courage, how one convoy, one service dog, and one veteran's quiet persistence can change a city's path. If you believe our heroes deserve this vigilance, leave a comment below sharing a veteran you'd honor today. Subscribe for more stories that remind us what true service demands. Sam's sacrifice, and the stand taken by those who rallied around him, still echo in every safer crossing and in every veteran's silent march home.